Hello and welcome. My name's Andy Reid. I'm the director of the Sports Think Tank, and today we're joining one of the 29 organisations that have helped us in our 2024 manifesto project. We were challenged to come up with policy ideas for a new government after the next election, which would probably not have great resource implications. As we all know, the economy and the public finances are in a position where spending is going to be very difficult for the next period. So these individual organisations have come together. We've created the pamphlet, which is available on our website, but we wanted to give each of the contributors a little bit more time to expand on what they're trying to say in their chapter. So let's head over to the next one in this series of this Sports Think Tank 2024 manifesto. Hello and welcome to the latest Sports Think Tank podcast. My name's Andy Reid. I'm the director of the Sports Think Tank, and I'm welcoming today Johnny Turner from Sport 80. As you know, this is part of the series that goes with the Sports Think Tank pamphlet, the 2024 election pamphlet, where we've pulled together a whole series of sports leaders to say what they think needs to be involved and working better in a new system under a different government in 2024. That could be a new Conservative government or a new Labour government. We'll leave that to the contributors for their wish list, but it might be an opportunity for a new start. And so we've asked lots of leaders like Johnny to tell us what a good system would look like. So Johnny, welcome. I know we've known each other for quite a long time, and I know you and Sport 80, but most of our listeners probably won't know very much. So if you want to just give a very brief background to yourself, and just as importantly to Sport 80, which I think has hit 10 years as in your lifespan.
Yeah, we are into our 11th year, Andy. So yeah, thank you very much for having me, and thanks for including us in the process. To give you some background, Sport 80 is a business that provides software to the sports industry. Our primary offering is our platform that we provide to national governing bodies, which essentially enables them to manage their entire business operation from one solution that provides their customers with a product like you would expect if you were shopping on the internet. And it also gives them an administration side to it as well. So they're able to manage all their operations. They're able to manage their members, their finance, and their general day-to-day business operations. So ultimately, that's what we do in a nutshell. We're starting to broaden that to enable our clients, the governing bodies, to reach broader markets to service their members. So whether it's counties, regions, clubs, individuals, it's a chance for those guys to ultimately reach more people, more organisations, and grow their businesses and grow sport.
Yeah, brilliant. That's fantastic. And Johnny, quite rightly, you sort of started off, I suppose, your chapter by just explaining data. I know we've talked about this lots before and probably on some previous podcasts. It's one of those words that's bandied around and probably not so much in our sector, but needs to be, as you probably argue, and we'll go on to that. But just would you set out your understanding of data-driven strategies and what that sort of really means at a quite a granular level? Lots of our listeners will be those in sports bodies and others, and probably quite at lower levels, and sort of understand they've probably got some data on a spreadsheet, but it's much more than that, isn't it? I think you probably need to explain what you mean by sort of data-driven strategy.
Yeah. So from our perspective, what we see in the sports sector is that there is access to, and there's certainly opportunity to access lots of data, whether that is data that tells us who an individual is, what their demographic might be, where they're located within the country, or what it is that they're participating in. There's a broad spectrum of data points that there is access to. What we've seen over the years and what we're helping to achieve now is how do we bring that data to life? So how do we enable an organization, to make sure they get that in a format that they can use? And you wouldn't believe, really, when you watch sport, and we've talked about this many times, you watch sport on TV and it's really glamorous. Behind the scenes, we're still playing catch up in this industry compared to the retail spaces and other sectors. So it really has been a learning curve for all of our customers and ourselves as a business in this space. As I say, we're coming into our 12th year this year. And from our perspective, it's about getting our hands on the data. And when I say I mean our clients, because we work on their behalf. Once you've got that data, how do you really use it? So what we want to try and identify, is it trends that help us identify who we should be targeting as potential members? So membership's a real crucial word for us in the national governing body space when we're talking about servicing and supporting these types of organisations. They live and breathe on their membership numbers. That's kind of the aside from events, that's the key source of revenue. So it's really important that these organisations are able to build a membership base that ultimately grows, but that provides a sustainable source of revenue, and ultimately is bringing people in that remain engaged in the sport. Yeah. So what we want to try and do is understand who those people are, who are most likely to sign up to become a member, a paying customer, for want of a better phrase, and then ultimately understand more about those individuals to enable us to activate them in different ways. So we might be able to sell other services to them, whether that's through technology like ours or whether it's through partners of ours. So get them onto an education pathway, whether it's getting them to buy some merchandise, they might then become a coach, and that helps to bring their kids through. And again, if we think about looking at professional sports clubs, I mean, I was a season ticket holder for many years at a football club, and I became a season ticket holder because there was a pathway there to get kids to come to the ground with cheap tickets. And obviously the strategy there is we're not going to make any money on the cheap tickets today, but that person's become a season ticket holder for 15, 20 years, and that's now generating us a revenue. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to help the governing bodies achieve with technology like ours. So first, it's about getting the data, first and foremost. Secondly, it's then about understanding it and bringing it to life. And then the next part that's really exciting for us is how do we turn that into something that can enable the organizations we work with to activate that data and turn that into paying customers. And like I say, ultimately, that's people becoming members. And we'll probably get onto this later in the podcast. That landscape's changing. What does a member look like today is becoming very different to what a member looked like 10 years ago. But ultimately, it's getting somebody into the sport to become engaged and to help us grow and become more sustainable. So ultimately, that's what we mean by kind of data. And if you're the head of ASOS or something like that, you're going to be listening to this thinking, well, we've been doing this for 20 years. And that's right. But in our sector, this is something that's still very new. So we firmly believe that is the way forward for sport to become a more sustainable and prosperous sector. And particularly in the sense that we're looking at here, how do we help a government move the sector forward to have all the other benefits, all the knock-ons that we know exist, whether that's the healthcare system and reducing the cost of healthcare to this country because people are fitter, healthier, have better mental health, physical health, and sport plays a huge part in that. And there's lots of studies to show that. Yeah. And obviously that's not for us, but how do we help achieve all of that? Well, actually, that's through doing the things that we're doing. And we can do a lot of that without necessarily asking for funding. But what we maybe need is to take a look at how do we support these organizations in the procurement of this type of technology and working with companies like ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. Actually, you did highlight the one thing I wrote down there that we will go on to. We'll probably always do that now, but the membership models. There has been a lot of talk, as you know, over the time I've been working with you, at what membership sort of looks like and what's the driver for people to become members of national governing bodies, particularly those that probably don't have to compete. So you'd think it off the top of my head, people like British Cycling and Athletics and others, where you just go out for a run. What's the offer? And how you can help organisations to drive that need or the feeling that there is a value to being a member. So I suppose it's two-sided, isn't it? Is you can get the data and entice people, but the offer's got to be there as well. So how's that membership? I was talking about this yesterday to people, subscription memberships and people being very fluid with their memberships these days. What does that look like, and what sort of challenges does that give you?
Yeah, so we've looked at this from a number of angles, and we see the challenge for every governing body, and we've been talking to we work with over 70 governing bodies both here in the UK and in the US, so we have the benefit of kind of looking at things from both sides and looking at it from two different territories as well, and we see the same challenges, and that is that the expectation for a customer, if we think about these individuals as ultimately as customers, the expectation these days is exactly as you described. It is to have something that is more fluid. It is to have something that provides more choice, because ultimately we have so much choice at our fingertips these days, whether it's choosing what clothes we want to buy, choosing what supermarket we want to go to, picking the types of offers that we even want to use to save money, even if it's, I'm reading some interesting articles about things like your club card deals these days, and maybe you're not actually physically saving the money you think you are, but ultimately you're being presented with choices that you think you're making. Yeah. And that's what the sports sector is up against with the traditional membership model. The core offer over the years has been if you want to compete at any sort of level, you need to be insured, and the only real way to be insured is to be a member of these organisations, and that's been the bedrock, and still is predominantly the bedrock of membership. And what that is leading to is kind of a bit of bit of almost disenfranchisement, if that's even a word, is that people don't see that value. They don't have an affinity to the organisation because they don't choose to do it. They have to do it. They're being told they need to be a member if they want to do the sport. They want to participate in the sport that they've chosen. And so what we are having conversations with many CEOs at the minute about how do we change that? How do we change that? But there's a huge risk, clearly. So they all have a member base of, there might be an organization with 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 members, whatever it might be. There's a base of paying customers that a governing body really doesn't want to lose, because that's, as we say, the critical source of income. And there is always that risk if you go to a more fluid model. If you take a Netflix subscription style model, which most of us are used to paying for these days, or Spotify or anything like that, you can cancel at any time. So you can pay your money up to a point, and when you choose to leave, you can leave. And that is obviously a big risk to the governing bodies. And to your point, it's now about how do we provide value for that membership? So it's not just pay us the money, you get some insurance, off you go. There now needs to be some additional value to it. And so from our perspective, obviously we on our own, we can't provide that. We provide the solution that enables these transactions to happen, and we can present the opportunities that are available to individuals. But the conversations we're having have enabled us to understand that there's clearly a need to build an ecosystem that can help generate that value. So some of the points in our chapter in particular, and certainly in the conclusion from our perspective, are about collaboration, about shared service, and about innovation. And what we've been doing over the last 3 years in particular has been looking for partners that are like-minded, so businesses that operate in the same way as us, which is, our passion is the sports sector, and it is about making this space as sustainable and prosperous as possible. And our vehicle is the technology. That wasn't when we came into this space. Those of us that founded the business, we weren't technicians, we weren't developers. We didn't just build a product and take it to market. It was about looking for how could we help the sector, and we saw there was an opportunity there to create something that would create efficiencies, economies of scale, hopefully generate revenues in the future, but also save money in the short term. And part of that the growth of that vision has been, okay, we can't do this on our own. We can't be a platform that provides all of these things, but we can build an ecosystem that gives our organizations the opportunity to say, how do we provide that? So do we need to provide additional value to members through a rewards-based system? Well, okay, we've got opportunities to do that. Do we need to provide clubs with a value proposition that makes them feel like they really want to be a member of the governing body, and then encourage people to sign up to their club, which ultimately feeds back up? So how can we provide clubs with that value? It's not just insurance these days. Can we help them fundraise? Everybody's struggling right now. It's a cost of living crisis that doesn't just impact individuals, it impacts the clubs that ultimately are facilitating participation. So can we help them fundraise? We've got some really interesting conversations going on with some companies that's what they do. It's all about helping clubs through little innovative ways of generating income, saving money, and ultimately, again, through technology like ours, making their lives simpler so that they can actually spend more time volunteering and giving up their time to do the coaching and the things that are actually really enjoyable, and not just sitting on a spreadsheet at 10 o'clock at night at your dining table. So kind of trying to bring those things together to provide value for the NGB to pass on, that's part of our role. But ultimately, that is a challenge that the sector is grappling with, is, what is the value proposition that would enable somebody, or would ensure that somebody doesn't buy their Netflix style subscription 1 month and decide after 1 month they don't want it anymore? How do we keep them on that and create what we would refer to as that recurring revenue? So we want people on an annual recurring revenue. We want them continually coming back. We don't want them just paying once or twice and never coming back. And that requires lots of engagement. So there are some other techniques. We're working closely with OTT providers, so we can bring televised style solutions to the member base and give them an opportunity to maybe pay a small fee to access that, but maybe they're paying a lesser fee for their overall membership. If they're somebody that wants to watch the content, they might have a friend or a family member that's competing at international level, and therefore they're now becoming a paying customer, whereas they wouldn't have been before. So
Yeah.
there's some really innovative kind of concepts and ideas coming up. Or certainly innovative for our space.
Yes.
They may not seem that groundbreaking when you look at it from the outside in, but
Yeah.
that's the kind of support that we need as a sector. We need to work together to make that really come to life.
Yeah. That was brilliant, and that probably gives a really good overview of the other challenges. As you say, you're there to help others to do those other things. Using the data and the sort of the information that sits in the background, but you can't probably develop the value proposition. And as you say, in a world in which we're used to subscription models, but also you use the supermarket example. But I think even now that loyalty to different supermarkets has changed. I just looked through our own spend, and I'm sure I talk to lots of people, because we now sort of shop at different supermarkets in the same week. You might do an Aldi shop and a
Yeah,
Waitrose shop and a Tesco shop and a Sainsbury's shop, because of you sort of chasing around, either it's through value or just through products. And I just wonder, I've always wondered this about the sector, is that not everybody is sort of wedded to one sport. So those are already in the system probably are, but I just wonder about that casual sort of seeker, as it were, who's coming through different sports, wants to try different sports. Is there a sort of a revenue sharing model eventually in which all NGBs could sort of benefit from almost like a national sports membership? I don't know what that looks like, because it probably wouldn't work and people want to be sort of localized. But just increasingly, I think your drive towards this sort of shared services in the background is, let's go through the GDPR requirements, but is there better ways of sharing more generic sports data, rather than individual NGBs having to sort of drive their own revenues from the small data sets they've got? Are you able to share at a national scale
a
that allows
hundred.
some of the lessons that you're learning from here? And as you said, talk about the USA experience as well. It'd be really interesting to see how different that sports model is compared to the UK. So there's two bits in there really, I suppose, but can we scale,
Yeah,
and what are the differences?
100%, Andy. So I think if we take the first point of this kind of shared data model, absolutely right. Taking aside, there's a lot to think about when it comes to GDPR and data
Yes.
privacy. However, if you kind of put that to one side and you look at the bigger picture, one thing that I know many of our clients would happily admit publicly, I'm sure, is that we have operated in a space where it's been very competitive, and maybe that's just the nature of sport. That every governing body has ultimately, over the last certainly the 11 years that we've been in business, one sport doesn't necessarily want to share with the other sport because, well, we might lose our member to that sport,
Yeah.
and it's been a very competitive environment. There hasn't been a lot of open sharing between governing bodies when it comes to who their customers are and who these members are, and what their attributes might be. And we've always thought that there is an opportunity to share something between sports, because when you grow up, the absolute key to helping somebody develop all of the different skills they need to ultimately to be able to participate in whatever sport they choose at some point is having that breadth of skill, whether it's developing hand-eye coordination, it's developing flexibility, lots of different motor skills that you develop all come from just participating in lots of different sports. And there's no reason why, as you become an adult, you shouldn't just participate in one sport and one sport only. And if it was easier to move between sports, I genuinely think there would be a shared benefit to everybody. Now we're probably still a little bit away from that kind of ultimate having this centralized kind of sports database, but I think there are things that can be shared between sports that can enable growth together. And that might be developing solutions that enable sports to say, okay, right, do you know what? We all require the same sort of
Yeah.
venue for a national championships or a training center. Or we work with a partner called Active Exchange, who are a really interesting business
Yeah.
because they are a data business that enable their customers to access lots of publicly available data sources, but they bring it under one roof and they do the data, and they can start to enable you to identify lots of things that are going on without that being your customers.
Yeah.
We plug in a governing body data set and we start to give them some real information that they can overlay. So we can say, okay, if we're using governing body X, we can give you all of the clubs that we have. We have all the venues of those clubs. So you can now plot on a map, okay, here are all the locations that we know people can participate at. we can see publicly, here's a map of all the activities that are going on and all the people that are active or that meet the type of demographic that we know this sport is looking for. And this sport is probably the same as sport X and sport Y are probably looking for the same type of people. Let's say it's two team sports. They're looking for the same type of individual. We start to do the analytics on who kind of typically goes to the website, who's most interested. We get all of that information through Active Exchange. We overlay it with real-time data like clubs and venues, and possibly some anonymized data that comes from the member base. So we can say, well, here's where all of the coaches are, here's where all the venues and the clubs are, and then here are all the people that could be customers. And we can start to enable them to identify, okay, well, actually, how about we use this location over here to run some promotions to get people into these two sports? There doesn't have to be, oh, well, it's only, we're only going for sport X, we're only promoting this for sport X. Those people might be interested in actually taking part in both. Now they know they're both at the same venue and there's an opportunity to get involved in one place. That is a really simple example of how two sports working together could use these types of solutions to identify new customers and bring them through. And we see that, moving on to the second part of the question, we see that happening more and more in the US, and maybe by virtue of the fact that it's a bigger territory anyway, and maybe they've developed this over the years because they've kind of needed to. But we see that happen quite often, is that they will share venues for competitions. We're seeing quite a lot of collaboration between USA Swimming and USA Track and Field from a marketing perspective. They've clearly identified that there's a real crossover, particularly at youth level, that kids are doing a lot of swimming, they're doing a lot of track. How do we work together to incentivize them to sign up to both schemes and get them on a pathway? And it doesn't mean that somebody's just going to become a swimmer or they're just going to become a track athlete. It's just about starting to get them into your overall scheme, your ecosystem, I guess. And I think we can learn a lot from that in the UK, and I'm sure there is some of that going on already. But certainly from our perspective, and we go right back to the kind of purpose of our chapter and the data side of it, is that's kind of how we see that utilization of data, A, that we're sat on, B, through collaboration, if multiple governing bodies can work together and utilize connected solutions that we work with, like sort of Active Exchange, to then say, okay, here's what we know, here's information about what we could have, and how do we start to funnel these people in? And there are opportunities then to look for sponsorship. A sponsor is going to be much more open if they know that they've got a market of 3 times the number of active individuals that are highly engaged because they're participating across your 3 sports, and they cross over, they're in similar demographics, they are a similar target market for these potential sponsors. Yeah, that becomes a collective opportunity, and that is then a revenue generator as well as actually an opportunity to drive participation, growth, membership numbers. So a lot of these things all kind of just fall off of the back of having the foundations in place and the mechanics, and then I think is bringing in the expertise to make all of this happen. So we're not experts in building a member base. We see what happens, and we use that experience, and we try and just keep improving our knowledge to help give advice on how you can facilitate what you're trying to achieve. But ultimately, that's our job. We brought in partners to our ecosystem to bring that other experience to the table. The guys at Active Exchange, as a really good example, will give you the type of knowledge and experience that I kind of just used that ASOS example at the very beginning. But what has been going on in that type of sector, they can bring to the table combined with our platform and give you that leverage that enables you to either identify opportunities for growth, look for trends in terms of where things are changing, where you might need to invest, where can you go and generate sponsorship, how might you sell tickets for competitions that potentially again raises interest in your sport and brings people through that may never have thought that they might be interested in your sport. And utilizing all these services, that's how we start to build this momentum. And the more of us that work together on that can ultimately happen pretty organically. It doesn't need the government to throw millions and millions of pounds at it. We all exist, we coexist, and if we work together, there's a lot we can achieve through that. And that is what we see is there's a lack of, quite rightly, there's a lack of expertise in the national governing body in their businesses, because they haven't been employed to be a data expert or an expert in any of these places. That's why our businesses exist. But if we can get enough of us together, and we've got a really nice example in Wales. We work with the Welsh Sports Association, and we're chatting to 3 of their sports at the minute that are quite different sports, but they have they have fairly sizable member bases. So they're looking at how can we do some of the things I've mentioned? How can we collectively work together? And can we do that with the Welsh Sports Association? So actually, if it works for three, could we maybe extrapolate that and then do it for 10? Can we then use the Welsh Sports Association to influence maybe what the government are looking at doing in terms of how they support some of the smaller organisations? Because they may well seem like niche sports, but to your point, if we can give more choice and we can allow more people in to the space, there's an opportunity that somebody might go from one sport over here to another sport over here, and now we've got two sports that are flourishing rather than just one because that was the easiest choice.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where we see it kind of all coming and tying back together.
Wow, that's brilliant, and it's one of the reasons that you sort of included in this, and we enjoy working with you because actually, every governing body, and not just governing bodies, but sport as a general, knows that it needs to operate behind the scenes like a business. And I suppose so there's other bits that you do which I want to sort of touch on as well, some that flow from that. So it's not all just about sort of driving revenues and commercial sustainability of your data, but for example, things like improving athlete safety and obviously the promotion of diversity inclusion. The data sort of sets allow us to do that. Should we just touch on that first one? Because obviously, with CIMSPA being tasked with producing this sort of centralised system, improving athlete safety around other sort of issues, whether it be concussion or whether it's issues within the individual sports themselves. I know you've mentioned that in here around DBS and coaching, etc. So do you want to sort of pull out what that allows us to do? Because there's bits of bureaucracy. Some of the other contributors have said they want less bureaucracy and red tape. I'm assuming your systems allow what needs to be done just to be done efficiently.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of putting it, Andy. I mean, our success in particular in the US today has predominantly been around the governance and compliance capabilities that we built in. We were fortunate that we were in the right place at the right time, so to speak, when things were starting to really build momentum with the US Centre for Safe Sport and what was going to happen, which is now happening, around governance and compliance and the requirements that NGBs were going to have. To meet. So we developed quite a lot of functionality to do exactly that, is to make sure that the things that need to happen are happening, and we have an audit trail. And it's very easy for an organisation to ensure that the people that need to have certain requirements in place have them. And if they don't have them, we are making that clear, and in lots of cases publicly making that clear. And it doesn't stop things happening. It doesn't stop bad things happening, but it ties a lot of the loose ends up, and it gives us a process that enables, that was historically happening on paper and therefore not really happening. If we're really honest with ourselves, there wouldn't have been a very easy way to identify if person X had his DBS or her DBS on a particular day 3-4 years ago. Well, actually, through our system now, it's very quick and easy to say, okay, this individual was actually told they shouldn't be coaching because they need to get their DBS in place or the safeguarding training. And in the US, it's all driven through Safe Sport. They call it the US Centre for Safe Sport. People taking that training, if they are going to have any sort of contact with minors, they have to have that training in place. And then most organisations will say you also need a background screen for DBS in the UK. And then they will need their coaching license or certificates in place as well. So we tie all of those things together so that we make it clear to the individual user that they are not what we would call not an eligible coach or official or whatever it is that person is looking to do. If we've put those requirements on their role or the license that they want to hold or they need to hold to be able to participate in that way, they have to have those things in place, and our system will track that, it will enforce it, and it will make it clear to them they are not eligible until they've got them. What we then do is we enable an automatic publication of a register effectively. So if you wanted to find a coach in your local area for your particular sport, if they're using our platform, you should be able to go online and search for that individual or search in the location for coaches that are on the current register. And if that individual doesn't appear, it's certainly reason to go and question it. Before you go and drop your child off at that particular coaching centre, there may be a reason to question that coach maybe shouldn't be doing the delivering the sessions. So that sort of thing just didn't exist when we came into the space. It was very much we're assuming that the coach over here has got all of the credentials in place because they just wouldn't be in that position if they didn't. Now it's you could go and check for yourself, and that individual has all the relevant trainings in place. They've got the relevant checks. And that safeguards the governing bodies who ultimately are responsible for ensuring that governance takes place. So ultimately, we've been doing that across lots of sports. So the CIMSA conversation is really interesting for us because we have a working model already of a shared solution whereby we can say now, there's 40 governing bodies we work with in the UK. We have all of the different coaches and officials and individuals. We have them all in the solution. We understand and we know how to do the pieces that I've just described in terms of ensuring the governance and the requirements checks take place. So that happens. We have the publication of the lists, so that happens. It's quite simple to then turn those into one centralized register without sharing that data out. If we touching back on GDPR, without sharing that with the wrong people, creating a publicly available view, that is something that is quite easy to solve and to deliver. And we feel that we've got a really good example of that. We are a shared service. We don't share at the moment anybody's data, so a Sport X doesn't get to see Sport Y's data within the system, but we're a shared service in terms of the capabilities that they get access to. NGBX's knowledge and requirements potentially benefit NGBY because they're starting to say, oh, actually, they're doing that really well. Okay, well, we'd like to deploy that, and we're able to do that. So that is something we took very early on from the US, and we're bringing that into the UK more and more. And we've had some really good conversations with CIMSA about how we can help there. And that is a really good example of what we were talking about. If you're looking at this from government level, how do we utilize the organizations that are already delivering these things? How do we utilize that rather than going and spending a load of money to try and build something from the ground up when it already exists? We already have these things that are in place, but we just need to understand how to make them work collectively. That's the big challenge next, I think, when it comes to governance and compliance. Yeah. But that for us is a really big thing because it is. It's really big because if that happens and it's happening in an effective and a streamlined way, that takes a real weight off a governing body. That's a real strain because it's such an important thing to make sure that individuals that are having access to, whether it's children or any other individual or vulnerable individual in particular, to make sure those individuals have been trained, that have all the relevant checks against them, just making sure all those things are in place. That's quite a weight and quite a burden and can take up a hell of a lot of time. So if you can just streamline that and make sure those things are happening, that takes a lot of weight off, and that frees up time and resource to be put back into actually doing all the things we talked about at the beginning of this, which is ultimately is about growing participation levels and giving our country the benefits off the back of that. That will make a real difference. So that's super important. And then moving on to that EDI part, that's a big part of that whole amassing data, and where data becomes really valuable to you is understanding who all of these people are. And if you are underrepresented in a particular area, why is that? Well, if you see a trend that tells you don't have any, or you have a very few of a particular subset of our society, individuals participating in your sport, well, then you can start to figure out how you maybe encourage those individuals. Is there a problem? Do we have a cultural issue? Are we not operating in areas of the country where we can target those types of individuals? So now we're actually, just from one piece of data and understanding that, we maybe uncover that actually we have certain areas of the country where we just haven't invested in infrastructure and resource. We don't have boots on the ground. There aren't coaches. There's no opportunity to maybe go and become a coach, which ultimately means we don't have anybody participating because nobody can teach them. And sometimes that can fly under the radar if you don't have your hands on the data initially to just even start to scratch a little bit below the surface and start to figure out why these things are happening. And to go back to that active exchange example, that is another reason for why we work closely together, and what we really want to try and bring to the sector is, let's use what we know. Where are high volumes, where are low volumes, whether that's looking at that from an EDI perspective, or whether that's looking at other parts of the business, like where are we really strong, where are we not, and then what's going on in the country. Can we overlay that with census data? Can we look at other types of data sources that tell us where things are happening, where they're not happening, where there might be high crime rates that we might be able to solve through getting people off the streets and into sport? All these things that are always very topical. It's got to be data led and data driven, and that's where we strongly believe that solutions like ours and others can facilitate that. And I guess ties the kind of the loop on that EDI piece, which is enabling everybody to understand, because it's not very easy just to collect that information. You know, it's one thing just asking people to tell us who they are. It's getting them to engage and starting to learn about who they are through lots of different sources, and then tying all that together to go, okay, right, now we can progress that into strategy, which is definitely your forte more so than it is mine, in terms of kind of turning things into strategy and looking at how you then go and develop a landscape to ultimately achieve all of this. But again, I feel like that's where it all comes back together.
Yeah, and for me, it's seamless. To develop strategy, you need the evidence base for it, and for me, a lot of that is data. So it's just really important before moving forward that I have the knowledge in front of me to understand what the
Yeah,
problems actually are, rather than just anecdotal. You do need to dig quite deeply to understand everything that sort of sits behind. Yeah, you can then be creative a little bit. Policymaking isn't always totally just evidence based. There is the need for sort of wider initiatives and testing and probing. But again, using the data to do that. So I think that's a brilliant summary, really, through sort of the weaving our way through the power of the data,
yeah,
and particularly, those last two pieces are the bits that volunteers in particular in national governing bodies and sports, it's the bit I'll admit personally, when it comes around to having to form fill and do other bits for things they are important, but they're not the sole driver for being involved in a sport. It
yeah,
can be a bit off-putting. So the easier we can make that for people, the sort of better. So I think you've demonstrated the commercial value, the sort of ease of access.
yeah,
We've got a population that's going to be, digital natives. These sort of everybody does things sort of online and are using their smartphones and other pieces. So you're moving into the place that I think everyone's going to understand. But just go through to your conclusion, Johnny. I think one of the things you quite rightly highlighted here is that there are some very small national governing bodies with not big teams of people running around trying to do all this sort of stuff. We're also talking about a generation of people who, particularly with older volunteers, who aren't digital natives. So,
yeah,
what you're looking at here, isn't it? And thanks for trying to make this as cost neutral as possible, because there isn't going to be a lot of money around to throw. But I think you've already alluded to it in sort of part of your contribution, haven't you? Is much more of this is just sort of training awareness, it's upskilling people, trying to reduce digital exclusion, and probably just greater collaboration. So, yeah, do you want
yeah.
to just pull out what you've sort of quite rightly said in your conclusion, is that there are some things you can do that won't cost tons of money just to put right?
Yeah. I think so, Andy. So I think that the key is finding the right partners. Is definitely the critical thing for us, is that we see from the very top down, we're seeing more and more of the leaders within our space. So the CEOs, just key decision makers, board members at governing bodies, have become more and more um, inclined to embrace technology, are seeing that
Yeah,
as a vehicle to the success of their businesses, and quite rightly they should. And
yeah,
it may be that everyone is embracing it, but those that we see, that is becoming more of a that's becoming something that we see more often than not now, and that hasn't always been the case. It's been seen as a cost to the
yeah,
business more than it ever has been seen as a benefit and something that we need to invest in. And there's been a lack of understanding, and probably still is to some extent, as to the true cost to produce these solutions. We are from a generation that has really benefited off the back of the likes of Apple and Amazon and the Netflix and the Spotify's, and they don't cost us very much money to access. In real terms, they do not cost us very much money to access what is unbelievably expensive technology. These businesses are generating billions of dollars every year, and they are reinvesting, if not billions, hundreds of millions of dollars in their technology, because they are amassing, back to the very beginning, they're amassing this wealth of data, and that is so valuable to them that they're willing to ultimately give most of this away, but they can, because they've got so much resource. And we're seeing this more and more, is that we talk to lots of businesses in our space providing all these different services and solutions, and everything comes at a cost, and we're all trying to figure out, how do we turn our solutions into something that can generate revenue, so that it doesn't have to be this huge quantum leap from, well, we'd love to have what you guys do, but we could never pay for that because we're doing it over here for nothing. And as we move down from the very top of an organization through to the volunteers at grassroots level, we're getting to a point where there isn't resource, and there isn't expertise, and actually there isn't the inclination. So how do we get from point A to point C down here? And that is the collaboration point, and it's about embracing the fact that we are moving in that it's a digital revolution. We are going through this period where we have got elements of our society that quite for very good reason have not been educated in the use of tech and find that very challenging. From just downloading an app and setting it up on their phone could be really intimidating, and is something that they just don't even want to entertain. So we have to find a way to support those types of individuals as well as those that expect everything to be done through an app.
Yeah.
And they just expect everything to be in the palm of their hand. So you've got this real differentiation, and we get that, we understand that, and we see that on a daily basis. So what we are seeing more of, and we are really pushing people to be, is to be brave. So what we mean by brave is to embrace technology, to embrace why it can help and how it can help, and not try to reinvent what we had 10 or 15 years ago in the way that people were operating on paper, and embrace how technology can help us. And if we embrace that and we make it simple and we reduce the amount of rules that we want to try and implement, so that we make the technology as simple to use as possible for the end user, we have more opportunity to get our hands on the data ultimately that we can then use to generate this value. And that is we feel is a brave decision for any CEO to make, and to really go and embrace it. But if you do, I don't think there's any looking back. There are ways and means to support individuals that are going to struggle with that transition, and that's education, and that does take time, but it doesn't necessarily cost lots of money. There's some support mechanisms you can provide, but then you've got this whole raft of individuals, and maybe going back to that little example I gave of becoming a season ticket holder at a football club, those are the people that are going to be generating you the value in the future, whether that's financial value, or whether that is that they're going to be a volunteer for tens of years to come, and they're going to help bring through the next generation. They're going to help you grow that sport. It's embracing those individuals, and for the vast majority, it's about having as much in the palm of their hand as possible. And the more we can do that, and the more we can encourage that, the more access to information we have, and that is really valuable, and that far outweighs the cost of any of these technologies. So I think there is a little bit of investment there that has to be made. Then there's a little bit of trust in the partners. Picking the right partner is really important. We're very proud of the fact that we are a British business. We have a proprietary system that we have built from the ground up, all from the UK, and everybody that works for our business operates out of our UK head office, obviously occasionally from home, but everybody is UK based, and that everything we do is reinvested back into our business here in the UK, and we're really, really proud of that, because we feel like we're contributing to the UK economy. That's brilliant, but also we've got the best interests of the organisations that are within this country. We've got their best interests at heart. Ultimately, if they're successful, we're successful. So it's a bit of give and take, and we feel we're a true partner, and there are others out there, lots of other businesses like us that have that mantra, and it's just about embracing those companies, putting our arms around each other and saying, if we all work together, we can achieve some really, really exciting outcomes. There are so many people participating in sport that just don't even get anywhere near these systems and databases right now that we know we can get to, we know we can activate. There's lots of other things that I think we may have touched on in our chapter, like other techniques we can use, gamification, and lots of other things we can bring to the table that are techniques that have been used for many years to engage with customers, to bring new people in, to get people in that wouldn't normally be a traditional customer of yours. There are all these things out there, but it's about us embracing that, and like say, kind of being open-minded to trying new things. And they're not all going to be successful on day one. Every time an Apple or an Amazon or anybody else, Netflix have done it fairly recently. They increased their subscription. They got a lot of stick. They changed their business model slightly. They might lose some customers on the one hand, but then they figure that out. That feedback is valuable. We can't get everything right, but there's this ability with technology that you can move and you can adapt quickly and you can iterate, and you only learn by trying these things. So yeah, that's our kind of ultimate message, I guess, is be brave and be innovative.
And no chat about data and all the rest of it can be complete, I suppose, Johnny, without just touching the final couple of sentences on AI. I know you've written some longer articles, and we probably need another separate podcast on this, but just very briefly, in terms of where AI is starting to impact on much of what you've sort of discussed, I suppose it's just automating many of the processes and the things that we've already talked about, isn't it? But where
Yeah.
else could it go?
Yeah.
What else could it do?
So I think for our space, certainly in this part of the space that we operate, there's kind of probably three key areas that we see in the short term that we can certainly leverage to help our customers. And that is making the customer experience more intuitive. So starting to leverage AI to do, again, the things that just happen when you're on a high-end e-commerce platform, the things that happen which you don't even notice. Oh, somebody bought the blue t-shirt that you're buying and they also bought these trousers. Why don't you buy
Yeah,
them?
yeah,
We've never been able to achieve that to date because we've had such a focus on the governance and the compliance and building all of these other tools that have created this real strong foundation. But ultimately, that's where we need to get to, and that's where we're headed at the moment. Is we're looking at how do we start to profile the customers in this database to be able to do exactly that. It's not as simple as somebody bought a blue t-shirt and they also bought these trousers to go with them,
yeah,
because we've got all these different things that are going on and they're not always the same. A coaching kind of program in one sport is not the same as another sport, and the labels aren't the same, and there's all these technical reasons why you can't just kind of do that very quickly and easily, but ultimately we can achieve that, and that's something we're now looking to embrace. So there's this customer experience. There is then leveraging it from an education perspective, and certainly talking about those individuals that computer literacy maybe is the kind of the way to define it, is that it can be an intimidating experience coming on a digital platform for the first time, and if you're not
yeah,
used to doing that, how can we make that experience more comfortable? So using AI to present individuals with a very easy way to find help. So we have a support center, we have a knowledge base, but actually what we see is that we don't get the number of people into the knowledge base that we would expect for the amount of information that's in there. So you get a lot of questions that come through a help desk where actually the answer was already there. So
sure,
how can we
yeah,
get people to that?
yeah,
So we're building capability that will enable them to search for what it is just by putting in keywords or sentences, and actually the solution starting to feed them. Actually, it's a really easy one. You've searched that you want to buy a membership, well, press this button and you'll be on the membership form. Or actually, do you just want to find out more about the membership scheme? Do you not really understand what it is that you're here to purchase? And do you need an article that we've also found that says, here's 10 reasons why to buy this membership, or here's some definitions of what our membership packages offer. So that's our second strand to AI, I think, is about education and supporting people in their use of the technologies, but also giving them access to more resource. There's no reason why that AI can't give them articles that are coming from the governing body's website as well, that are
yeah,
just about the sport in general. So that's the second strand. And the third strand is then using that in the data analytics. So we're already doing that now, and that'll be something that we'll be rolling out over the course of this year, which is starting to use AI to create predictive analysis.
mm,
So what we want to do is we want to say, okay, what we're able to do right now is we can see all the numbers and we can see in real time what is happening, what has happened in the past, what's
yeah,
happening as of this minute. It's real time. How many members we have now versus how many did we have at the same point in time last year? What we want to be able to say is, what does next month look like?
yeah,
What does next year look like? If this group of people all got to this point and then they dropped off, can we identify who they're likely to be now so we can act on it now rather than waiting for them to leave and then go back to them to say, oh, sorry you left, Andy, but could you tell us why? So we might be able to get you to come back, by which time you're not even reading the email that's in your inbox because you're off doing
yeah,
something else.
yeah,
So that third strand is about using the data to start to trend and profile. And again, this is nothing groundbreaking in the world of data, but we haven't seen any governing body doing that at all in terms of the breadth of governing bodies we work with. We haven't seen anybody doing that, and we're bringing that in right now, so that we can hopefully start to use that in lots of different areas. I use membership as a really simple example, but there's no
yeah,
reason you can't use that from a high performance perspective, from a coaching education perspective, and from a general kind of what are the customers doing? Like, where do they go? What do they click on? Where do they get to? When do they drop off? Do we have lots of people that get to this particular field on the membership form and they don't feel comfortable filling that information in and then they leave? Okay, well, that's great to know, because now we can start to action that, because nobody wants to give us this piece of information. Right. Can we change that? Do we change the way the question is asked? Do we remove the question altogether? Can it be captured at a different point? Can that person give it to us when we really need it? Do we need it up front? So there's lots of things we can use that for, but just starting to create some predictive trends that start to tell us what might happen in the future so that we can act on it before it happens. So there are three strands that we see from our business's perspective, how we can use AI and how we will be using it throughout this year.
that's brilliant. Like I said, so often people just throw away these comments about AI and stuff, and so just to have some real life examples of
Yeah,
what you're
it's
building in.
the buzzword, isn't it, at the
Really
minute?
helpful just to make it really granular and understandable to people, because it's, you go through these trends, don't you, where people throw around large
Yeah.
sorts of words that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So that's really helpful. And as always, Johnny, as we draw to a close now, it's just thank you for bringing some enthusiasm and some wisdom to this area. As I said right at the beginning, it is important that we include stuff around data in our documents, because the sector does require it, and it requires a sort of an enhancing of its role in what we do. We shouldn't be afraid of technology. We need to enhance it and to embrace it, and particularly for a sector that relies on lots of volunteers. So it simplifies a lot of this stuff that you've been talking about. We're not large. There's not many very big national governing bodies with staff of hundreds of people, are there? I mean, this is quite a smallish sector at that stage. So that combination of collaboration, supporting trusted partners and things, and again, I think that's quite important for the role that you play, really, isn't it? Is that you've emerged from the sector for the sector, not just a large outside organisation, as you say, coming in. Trying to take money out of the sector. It sort of feels very circular with yourself. So a big thank you for all that you do. A big thank you for partnering with us in this particular sort of document. And hopefully, I've got the conclusions here sitting right in front of me. The document will and has been started to be placed in front of policymakers, and it's gained a lot of interest and some really positive reactions. So hopefully some of these smaller things, as we called them, almost like marginal policy gains, if it works for elite sport, marginal gain, then these marginal gains can help us all, can't they? So
that's it.
Small ideas, incrementally iterating, as you just sort of said, can start to make a difference. I know we've probably been pushing some of these agendas for some time, but it just feels sometimes that we are inching towards these improvements. So thank you for what you and the rest of your team do at Sport 80 for ensuring that. So so thanks for being with us again today.
Pleasure. Anytime, Andy.
It's always good just to catch up with you anyway. And I always go away enthused and thinking, I've now made a list of about another 30 things that I need to think about in terms of.
There's
you talked about, and I love tech, as you know, so it's all like really good for me.
Yeah, there's so much opportunity out there, and that point you made is quite right. Is that the data, it exists. That's the beauty. It's all there. It's out there, but we have to get to it, and that's not an easy thing to do.
Right.
And something that we can't necessarily put in a podcast, really. But there are companies out there that they want the data. That's ultimately our goal, is to get it for the NGB, and that's where we really differ. And that's a challenge for us to continue to make this a really sustainable business and give the power, as much power as we do, to the NGBs to ensure that they can get the value out of it. That some of the businesses we come up against, there's different agendas for them, and it's just making sure that it's really, really, we're just continuing to bang that drum that we really do differ in that sense.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to the latest podcast. Hopefully you found it helpful and you've gained some insights from our guest. If you have enjoyed it today, it would be really helpful to hit the like button and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. As always, feel free to pop over to any of our social media channels to comment or ask a question. Or sign up to our monthly newsletter at sportsthinktank.com. If you're interested in supporting our work at the Sports Think Tank, again, just head over to the website or drop me an email. Thanks, and see you again next time.